The brand new Tarkov event Hustle is currently underway within the game, and of course today I'm going to teach you a couple of things to make it a little bit easier if you are playing PvE, and so hopefully it will make it just that bit better when you're trying to push into the health resort on Shoreline. So with that being said, how did I manage to take out multiple bosses with only just 2 left to actually find? And I'm sure we'll do it later on today. But first things first, what kind of setup did we actually run? And in fact, this is a slightly different setup to what you're probably expecting to see. And this is because we're running it on night raids. Now, there's something really interesting about using night raids on Escape from Tarkov PvE that I'm going to talk to you about and how it actually works. So straight off the bat, it is going to require you to A, have a night vision scope to put on one of your weapons, and B, be able to get yourself some night vision goggles. And although you don't have to have these exact night vision goggles, you do want to have at least a variation of these to be able to actually pull this one off if you are interested in making it a hell of a lot easier, to the point where you can at least get one boss kill pretty much every single time that you go to the resort, if not picking up 3, 4, maybe even more, and of course depending on your skill level, way more than that. It just makes it super easy to actually do, and I've been basically farming the bosses for both their weapons, their ammunition, and various different key cards and keys that you can get from the bosses. It's been really nice to actually do, and I was actually told this by someone I was in the Tarkov Discord, so yeah, really happy to know about this kind of method, and then I'm going to show it to you guys and hopefully it'll be useful. So if it is going to be useful, or you're finding the Tarkov PvE content very good, or whatever it is, then be sure to subscribe and like the video if you are interested, so that more people can know about this and actually get it done. So with that being said, what are we running? Well, of course we are running an Exfil. You can use a Bastion, and of course with the Bastion with the additional plate on top can help for the increased armor, but you can use pretty much anything, any sort of level 4 armor on the head, as long as it can actually fit the night vision goggles. Now, the night vision goggles currently you cannot actually buy, and in fact you're going to have to buy them from traders. You've got various different barters for them, and it varies in price as to how much it's going to cost. Obviously you want to be picking them up for these if possible. If you've got skier, you'll be able to pick it up for just 1 RFID radar, or whatever you want to call it, and so yeah, basically picking up yourself a night vision goggles like this one is going to make it a lot easier, because we are running it on night raids, and I'll show you the gameplay and how we kind of path our way through, at least in terms of getting some easy kills. So then we've got ourselves an SR25. Now, you can use basically any marksman rifle, or rifle with a decent amount of penetration, things that can go through if you've got the ammo. You need to have the right ammo. If you're using things with like level 3 penetration or anything like that, it's going to be a bit of a pain. For this, we actually used M62, which can go through level 4 armor, and of course a low chance for level 5s. And essentially you're going to be able to either 1-tap some of the bosses, or 2-tap them in the head, pretty much all of them 2-tapped in the head, or alternatively going for the kind of thorax shots, etc., to take them out. The better the round that you've got, obviously there are better rounds than this, so things like M993, but you're probably not really gonna find these very easily, and of course using them on this event is completely down to you. But I didn't actually use them, because by the time we'd actually used all of those, yeah, it probably would have been a lot of rounds we would have needed, because at the end of the day I'd taken about 80 rounds, and this pretty much works out quite well, taking 1 mag with 2 mags in the rig, using any old rig. You don't need a particular rig, to be honest with you, and making sure to stock up on a ton of nades. Now, nades are one of the biggest ways that you can get through this event pretty easily, and that's because you can use them to essentially detect where the enemies are. You can also get a couple of kills with the nades as well, which are really handy if you've got impact nades and you know how to use them and don't end up throwing them at yourself. then yeah, they're really good for taking out things like Killer, Tagilla, all of the bosses that are just super annoying when they YOLO towards you, Kalante, that sort of stuff. Any of the impact nades are pretty good for those, but generally just being able to throw a load of nades at once is pretty good. We've also got ourselves some stun grenades. Now these are super cheap, and they're really effective because essentially you can throw them, you can find out where your bosses actually are on the map, as well as be able to flash them, and that way they're not going to be able to see you, and you can move into different locations on the map. In terms of armor, we ran with the Gen 4 body armor, but we ran with a variety of different armors throughout this time, obviously getting taken out quite a few times, I won't lie, because at the end of the day, when you're trying to take out as many bosses in one raid, rather than just get out when you get a couple, it can be pain. So yeah, we took level 5 body armor. You use the highest that you possibly can. If you've got level 6, that's what you want to be going for. Mine are currently out of commission at the moment, waiting for insurance, as I'm sure we'll get some of them back. Make sure that you get ones that actually have side plates and put those side plates in. They're super cheap and they're not going to cost you a whole lot. Remember, insurance on PvE is going to come back, so everything you use is basically going to come back every single time. As you can see from yesterday, we've got some of our gear back. You can see what we're using when I was initially doing it in the daytime. But then we come to the actual gun. We are using the SR25. Now the SR25, obviously use any marksman rifle, put a suppressor on it, want to make sure that you got your high pen rounds, but also making sure that you have got a night vision scope. Now we're using a FLIR. This is basically the best night vision scope or thermal scope that you can use because it is just cracked. You can see exactly where the bosses are, you can find them, and it's really easy for kind of finding them before they aggro you, that sort of stuff, and it makes it super easy. Now earpieces, it doesn't really matter, but make sure that you're not using absolute trash. Things like tactical sports are fine for me, but it's all personal preference. Just use the one that you're most comfortable with and don't mind spending the money on. Obviously Contact 4 is pretty good and probably going to be your best bet, but that's up to you. Condors we've got as well, just for the additional protection, just in case we get somehow naded and one of them hits my face, but at the end of the day, probably going to get taken out anyway. But yeah, that is kind of the setup. Make sure that you have got your meds. I have gone into a couple of raids where I just completely forgot to bring in my meds. There is a possibility to use a rig which has the or an armored rig so that you can use the Red Rebel extract. This is a super easy way of doing that. You'll just need a paracord, but considering that you can basically just run away and go to any of the extracts, it's not really a problem, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's a requirement, but it does make it easier to extract if you're purely there for the loot and not really about the task. But now let's jump into the gameplay and I will do a quick little review of how the game actually went and what we did and my thought process going through and the sort of area that you do want to go when you are in the game. So jumping into the raid, we actually spawn a really far away. It will happen in the night. Make sure that you do go into your raid after 10 o'clock. This is one of the biggest things that you have to do when you are using a night raid on this game. That is because the boss's view ranges and the sighting range at which they'll actually aggro you is much lower when you do go in after 10 o'clock. I don't know when it ends, but I would never go into a raid past 4 o'clock in the morning, so make sure, and probably not even at 3 o'clock in the morning. I would just go between 10 and probably 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when I would actually go in, so make sure that you aren't going in after that or before that when you are doing this night vision raid, so just be aware of that. Now we start off ages away. There are still scavs, there are still PMCs in the game, so just be aware of that. And of course we find ourselves some scavs, which is just perfect, exactly what I wanted at the beginning of this one. Wasn't sure if they're PMCs, but obviously with the voice lines we work it out pretty easily. You can see here just taking them out really easy. This is essentially what the FLIR looks like if you haven't actually seen it before and you're somewhat fairly new to ever using the FLIR. Unfortunately, the FPS within the actual scope is like 30, so it's absolute garbage. Don't think anyone else is over here, so we end up just moving away. But I'm doing a full rundown of what we actually do during this raid, and we'll kind of skip when I actually go to the extract at the end, because pretty sure you don't want to see me running around with a load of loot after the extract's actually done. So one thing that is really good to have on your weapon is a laser, one that you can see in night vision. So make sure that you do have a laser, because it's really annoying because you do have to swap between your night vision, flipping it up, which if you're not familiar with night vision goggles or you've never done a night raid before, it is the N button as default. So you just press N and it will flip up your visor, and essentially, yeah, you'll be fine with that. But if you then use your FLIR when you have actually got it flipped down, you won't be able to see through the scope. So if you're not actually using your FLIR and you're not actually in it, you want to swap to your night vision, and then once you are ready to fire or check out where your opponents are and bosses, then you want to actually flip up your night vision, and then you can use the FLIR. So just a word of advice, make sure that you do that, and make sure that you have got a laser, because essentially you can't aim down scope when you do end up in very close range proximity. So I very rarely will actually use the scope when we're super close to opponents, because yeah, I mean, the default zoom on the FLIR is about 2.25. Is potential for you to bring in another weapon for those close range engagements, and they pretty much come from the goons. So yeah, you want to make sure that you aren't kind of in that sort of region where the goons are going to YOLO into you and you only have the hipfire option. So yeah, just make sure that you do have a laser or a secondary weapon to just quickly swap to and take out those goons as they do aggressively approach you. Goons are pretty cracked, and they're probably the most annoying ones of Tarkov PvE when you are using the night raid, because they do just YOLO towards you, and if you don't take them out quickly, they can really screw you over. That's where the nades come in. If you hear them or you take out one of the goons, the others will just basically rush you. So you want to be throwing those nades as soon as you take out one, and then yeah, it'll kind of not de-aggro them, but it will stop them in their tracks, and you can hopefully take them out from range. One thing to note, there are PMCs over here, so just be aware of that. You don't want to get lasered by PMCs at the beginning of the raid, especially when you've got FLIRs and stuff that you'll have to wait an entire day to actually get back if you are using the insurance. But with that being said, now we can kind of push towards the actual resort. And so when you come up here, there's nothing to really be worried of. Scavs do spawn down there, so just be aware of that. But I mean, I've only seen it once in multiple raids, so yeah, nothing to really worry about. You can spawn on a night raid down by the water, so just be aware of that, and you'll have to take a slightly different route to where we go. But usually I will take this same spot. Now you can take the opposite side to where we are right now, and you can use a couple of rocks. But when you do push up to this location, this is kind of where I usually enter the base from. So as we start off, I'll kind of just scan the area with the FLIR, making sure we're on the 2.25 times zoom. It's really clear when you do see an opponent. It just highlights in red for those of you who aren't familiar. And then, yeah, once we've kind of checked out the area, or at least the basis of it, we've swapped back to the night vision. One thing to note when you are pushing here, Sturman does like to YOLO on down to kind of the farm bit to the right-hand side of this. So just be aware that you can get pumped from the right-hand side. So be aware of that. Just directly over to the right-hand side. Now, we're going to come up here. Obviously, the Tarkov rocks are just super happy. So just be aware that they don't always work as intended. But you can see here, this is where the FLIR is absolutely broken to complete this event, because all you have to do is essentially get to a rock. The aggro range is so small for a lot of the bosses that they won't actually see you. You do want to stay outside of the resort until you've taken out a few of them, and then you can push in, and that's where having a second weapon can be really useful. Things with a flashlight, just so you can push in, and then you can just have your night vision on with a normal holographic or whatever you want to use, or a normal scope, so it is a potential option. But for the more safe route, which you can pretty much guarantee that you'll survive if the goons don't just YOLO you, then yeah, you can come over here. Now this is exactly what I mean by finding ourselves our first opponent. Of course it hits the rock. You can see this guy's not even anywhere near aggroing. We see that there is another one. It didn't appear like it was an actual boss, so we're not entirely sure at this point, but it does look like a normal scav. After completing the raid, it was a normal scav, but bosses do spawn exactly where those guys were. So just be aware when you do fire at them, make sure to pump in quite a few to make sure that you do take them out. And now we're kind of at this northern building. The one thing to be very aware of when you do push over to this side is that on the right hand side of this building, that is where a lot of the goons will spawn, and the goons are just a pain in the backside. So when you do come up to this little rock, there's only been one occurrence where I've basically been beamed by not Kalontai, but Kaban, who was just sat out in the open with his little rat LMG. So yeah, just make sure that you do just quick peek and then see if they aggro on you. If they don't, perfect. You can line up your shot and then poke over and take the shot that you need. We're just slowly walking over here, just seeing if we can hear some footsteps. I didn't want to throw my grenade because sometimes it will actually aggro the goons, and aggroing the goons can be, as I said, super annoying. So if you can take one of them out before they aggro onto you, that's perfect. But you can see here, we're just scouring the area, just seeing if we can see anyone. And then it's really a case of just working the ridge lines, finding places where the actual bosses will spawn. They spawn outside, probably 5 or 6 of them will probably spawn somewhere outside. Most of them will actually run outside at some point, and they just basically roam the entire area. This is where the goons will spawn, where I'm looking directly now. Remember that flares and thermal scopes do not work through windows, so if you are going to attempt to actually shoot in through the windows, that you want to break the windows themselves before you can see anyone. So obviously the bosses can still shoot you through them because they don't care if it's thermal or not. They're going to actually see you regardless. So making sure that you do break some of the windows is really useful. But from here, it's really just a case of just scouring the outskirts. We actually move over to the left of where we were and just making our way around and essentially taking out as many of the bosses that we can find. And we find ourselves some of the goons, we take them out, and we're just really taking out Gluhar, that sort of thing within this particular raid. It's really that simple. Just stay far enough away, use rocks, use cover in between you and the opponent, and it's really going to work out quite easily. It's not particularly too difficult on the night raids. Obviously the bosses still have crazy aim, so when they do aggro you, you have to be very careful, but it really isn't that bad. One thing that you can do once you've kind of cleared out the lower floors and you actually decide that maybe you want to venture into the actual building, you actually want to go to the roof of a lot of the buildings. You can see pretty much everyone from the roof of the buildings of the health resort, and you can take out quite a few people. Now the goons will aggro you on the roof and they pre-fire you, which I don't know if it's just broken or not, but they will literally pre-fire before you've even actually made your way up. Obviously they have infinite ammo, which is just horrific, and yeah, they just basically slam you with rounds. That's where the grenades come in, really useful, and stun grenades, basically stun grenading them from the roof and then poking over and dealing some damage to them is basically your best way. But just take things really slow on these night raids, and if you are using the Red Rebel, it's super easy to extract, doesn't take very long. But if you're not, then make sure that you do give yourself plenty of time to actually get out, as you don't want to be purchasing the flare multiple times if you don't actually want flares for another map. And of course, remember that the trader limit on buying flares is 1 every like 2 hours. So if you are getting taken out a lot, then you're going to need a lot of flares. And of course, the more trades that you have for them, the better. But with that being said, that's kind of what I did in order to get a ton of boss kills, and it really is quite simple. We're able to average about 3 or 4 bosses every single raid that we do on this map. It really is that simple, and hopefully it will be useful for you guys to be able to do as well. But if you have any questions, or maybe you have a better way of doing it, then let me know, and I will hopefully share that as a pinned comment on this video. But if you did enjoy this video, found it useful, or just generally enjoyed watching, then hopefully you will subscribe to the channel, as we're pretty new, at least to Tarkov on YouTube. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.